Hello, I'm Jack Shagna.
And I'm Henry Peden. While doing research over many years, I began collecting Harford County ghost stories from books, newspapers, and other people. When Jack published his Chesapeake City Ghost Stories in June of 2023, a few months later, I was inspired to pull together a Harford County collection in a book titled Harford Hauntings.
At that time, however, the thought of doing a video did not occur to us until recently when our videographer Tim Rica suggested such a program would be most interesting. As we wanted the stories to be told theatrically, Professor Ben Fissler of Harford Community College agreed to have his drama class students participate.
Thus, we have local stories narrated by local actors for the enjoyment of local HarfordTV viewers and other people with an interest in the occult.
In August 1903, on the road leading from McCann's Corner to Priestfoot Bridge, on a gate post at George Silver's Lane, a ghost was seen by 3 people who happened to be passing by at around 8 o'clock at night. It seemed to be a very tall figure and was enrobed in white. At first, they were going to examine it to see what it really was, when one of them exclaimed in a very frightened manner that he couldn't do it. Their courage being shaken by his remark, they all took out in a dead run down the road. When at a safe distance, they glanced over their shoulders, only to see the frightful, ungainly object walking up the road in the opposite direction. Others had been known to pass this place at all hours in the night, and never noticed anything of the kind. And it seems strange to everyone that these 3 alone should see it. While this story may or may not be true, it could be simply proven either way by seeing for yourself. Any takers?
George Brown, an African American, was tried for assault with intent to murder Amanda Washington, another African American, in Havre de Grace in 1889. The evidence was that a crowd of African American boys were searching in the alleys for ghosts. Someone said there were ghosts in a lime box. Then a pistol was fired, and somehow Amanda Washington was shot. She later testified that she did not know who shot her. John Martin testified that Brown admitted that he had fired the pistol, and if he had shot a woman, it was the fault of the boy who took them to the ghostly place. Whatever the case, Brown was found not guilty of the charge. Does this mean the lime box ghost was really to blame? Shoot if I know.
Back in the late 19th century, Jimmy Brown thought he had invented a plan for driving ghosts out of the wall. His plan was to pour something into the hole in the wall of his room where the ghosts were that would make them glad to come out and go somewhere else. He stated that there was a kind of medicine called nasty fetidi, which was a botanical folk remedy that smelled worse than anything you could think of. He went to the druggist and asked him if he could melt some so that it would stay melted. He didn't tell him what he wanted it for, so the druggist gave him a bottle of something that smelled just like nasty fetidi. He took it home and poured it into the hole in the wall and left the window open so the ghosts could get out. He shut the door and went downstairs. He thought the ghosts left, as they could not have stayed in the wall because he couldn't stand it in the room himself, and he said he's not as delicate as a ghost. Anyway, the terrible smell became quite a big problem, and his father indicated he would probably not be able to go into his room until sometime next spring. We can hardly live in the rest of the house. The punishment imposed on him by his father was harder to take than the smell. Ghastly.
Long ago, in the hills, in the vicinity of the rocks, there was a very remarkable rabbit. Tradition tells us it was the size of a western jackrabbit, and it had the ability to jump from crag to crag among the lofty rocks. Hunters tried without success to shoot it, trap it, or snare it. After many failed attempts, the superstitious hunters came to the conclusion that the body of the rabbit was the habitation of a witch who thwarted their attempts to kill the animal. They even went so far as believing that the witch would not permit the slaughter except by use of a silver bullet. Scarcity of such a precious metal prevented hunters from using such bullets anyway. The rabbit was left to wander at will, and for many years afterwards, it was never seen and then forgotten. Its disappearance was clouded in mystery, and some believe that the witch may have taken another habitation or assumed another form. Even though the mythical story was told again and again, later dwellers in the region regarded it as a creation of an untutored and imaginative mind, hopping down the bunny trail of superstition.
While many Harford Countians tell ghost stories quite seriously, others tell them with a tongue in cheek and a sparkle in their eye. Such a storyteller was Mr. Johnson. This is one such story he told. Sam Jones was a hunchback who died of old age. His friend, Ernest Boyd, was sitting up with the corpse, a practice common many years ago. Sam had been a cat fancier during his lifetime, and at his death, his 15 surviving cats roamed the house disconsolately. Occasionally, one would come close to the coffin, where the unembalmed corpse rested against the protection of a glass panel, which was another custom of bygone years. This use of a glass panel to cover a portion of the coffin was probably born of the necessity to keep prowling rodents away from the corpse, while still being able for people to view the deceased. At any rate, Ernest sat beside the glass enclosed form of his hunchback friend and kept a vigilant watch. Suddenly he noticed a peculiar thing. The body of his friend was rising, slowly, quietly, almost as if it was controlled by invisible hands. Thinking an imperfection in the glass was creating an optical illusion, Ernest changed his position. Still the body rose, slowly, strangely, determinedly, until finally its nose was flattened against the panel of glass. In the deathly stillness, Ernest heard a cat meow loudly. Brought out of his trance with the sudden noise, Ernest yelled pleadingly, "Get back down there, Sam! I'll keep off the cats!" Mr. Johnson told this story quite seriously and explained the phenomenon by saying that a corpse slowly contracted as it cooled before the days of embalming, and that his hunchback friend was just cooling off. I have a hunch he could have been right, but back away from suggesting what may have been the perfect explanation.
In 2003 and 2005, everyone from housewives to hunters started reporting sightings of a strange creature prowling backyards and raiding pet food. The creature was dubbed the Coyote because it resembled a combination of a hyena and a coyote. The Mathis family of Joppa reported seeing the animal drinking from a pony trough behind their house. They were naturally upset by the animal, which they were unable to identify. But they took pictures. Veterinarians attempted to explain away the creature as being a male red fox with sarcoptic mange. Many people didn't accept the explanation, stating the coyote was very much bigger. They believe the animal still roams the countryside. Maybe it was a coyote with a mange. What do you think?
Camp Conowingo in Harford County is apparently a scary place. There's an abandoned chimney on the side of the trail to the cabins. The story is that a mother and her 3 small children lived there in a cabin during the Civil War. The father was away at war. One night, the mother looked out and saw Confederate soldiers coming. She knew they were going to kill the family because her husband was a Union soldier. She put her children in the chimney to protect them, and they heard their mother being killed by the soldiers. After the soldiers left, the children cried for help, but no one came, thinking the family was all dead. Eventually, the children died of starvation. It is said that if you shout up the chimney on a very dark night, the children will scream back at you and haunt your dreams.
Bon Air is an old country estate near Laurel Brook, close to Old Falston. This substantial stone house was built by Charles Francois Frederick de la Porte in 1794. There have been stories about the haunt of wagon wheels that roll around the old house every day at noon. Why noon? Why not midnight? Some say there was treasure hidden somewhere about the house that was never found. And there were undoubtedly others who tried to dig around with their midnight shovels without any luck. So, was the haunted wagon bringing in the treasure to be buried, or was it preparing to carry it away? No one knows, but if you do want to find out, stop wagging your tongue and don't be afraid to go along for the ride.
In 1890, it was reported that Miller Richner Bettner had left the Orem residence and mill near the village of Swansbury. He complained of witches setting the water wheel in motion during the night, draining the mill pond so that he did not have a sufficient water supply in the daytime for his mill operations. He said that the place was haunted, and that the spirit of a dead person who drowned in the mill dam 50 years ago asked him one dark night for a chew of tobacco, and also threw horseshoes at him. Some believe it was not ghosts, but thieves who were to blame, and who also scattered his meal over the mill floor, and even purloined a grindstone. Thomas Dismore later moved to the Orem mill and stated he did not believe Bettner's story about witches and ghosts. Where we'll see about that.
A number of serious accidents occurred within 100 yards of the concrete bridge spanning Winter's Run at Lake Fanny on the Baltimore Pike. These events all happened within the 10-month period prior to June 1915. It was reported that someone had better visit the section with the proverbial rabbit's foot and change its luck. Sunday seemed to be the fated day. On Sunday morning, August 16th, a car full of joyriders dashed over the steep embankment south of the bridge, and the car and one occupant were considerably damaged. Late Saturday night, November 12th, John McCommons and his old hack horse, returning to Bel Air from John Irvin's with a load of precious firewater, plunged over the embankment into the run, and the horse was drowned. On Sunday morning, June 16th, two African-American boys, named Edward and Richard Johnson, were drowned in the mill race probably a little more than an hour after John Cahill and Truman Snyder were seriously injured by an automobile about 100 yards up the road. The approach on either side of the stream is very steep, and halfway down each hill is a sharp curve. The crossing at this point is very dangerous. Was all this just a matter of driver error? Or was this the work of the supernatural bringing bad luck? Who do you think?
It was reported in 1945 that the local rail hopper, the Ma and Pa, had a ghost aboard. They had a railroad car window that wouldn't stay down. It kept going up every now and then, all by itself. Now, it may be understandable how a faulty window could slide down, but how it could slide up without help is mysterious. Was this the action of a ghost or some prankster? This may not be much of a ghost story unto itself, but how can we write about ghosts and not mention the famous old Ma and Pa Railroad? That's been done now, so we get back on track and chug along with our other stories.
In the Benson neighborhood of the Baltimore Pike, on the left side of the road approaching Bel Air, there once stood an old square-logged cabin. One day, in a local restaurant, a man, who lived many years in the old cabin with some friends who shared in paying the rent, told an interesting story. The man said that often, during the night, there were gruesome manifestations of the house being haunted. Strange rapping, groans, and moans were accompanied by the sound of chain rattling. All of these things were very terrifying, but he and his friends could not afford to live anywhere else. Then, one day, the owner of the cabin decided to clean out the abandoned well behind the house. At the bottom was found a human skeleton, which was taken out and given a decent burial. From that day on, the nocturnal phenomena completely ceased, which brought much satisfaction to the man and his friends. All's well that ends well in a hair-raising event like this one. It can only be hoped that the landlord did not, because of the improvement of this circumstance, raise the rent.
Between 1740 and 1747, a Jesuit father named Bennet Neal settled on Deer Creek. Whether or not he built the monastery, no one knows for sure. In any case, all the events about the mission of St. Joseph appeared here at that time, which was locally known as Priest Neal's Mass House. The building stands on the hilltop overlooking the Deer Creek. It is massively built of stone with walls a yard thick. The ceiling beams, now hidden by plaster, are black walnut and exceedingly heavy. The building measures 26 by 46 feet and is 1.5 stories high. Rumor has it that one of the priests lie buried underneath the front door, and even today it is reported no person will sleep in the house for fear of the ghost. This old church structure has long been a private residence. If you believe it's old ghost rumor, then all that can be said is, bless you, my son.
Over 150 years ago, an old trapper declared that in his youth he had learned from a reliable source about a snake of extraordinary size, which lived in the hills opposite the ancient mill at Rocks. That would have been the Milford Mill, or Preston's Mill, that was once located at Rocks Road, near Cherry Hill Road Bridge. The snake story was verified by William Jeffrey, an aged citizen of Bel Air who informed his friends that his father had pointed out to him the track of a snake as broad as a cartwheel. The imaginative nature of a man and his tendency to exaggerate persisted through the years. Several unnamed persons of unquestionable integrity have declared that they saw the monstrous reptile. In more recent times, however, the incredulous story is considered rather doubtful. Hundreds of sightseers have roamed the hills and valleys of the Rocks without any fear or even thought of the imaginative serpent of the past. Does that mean it never existed in the first place? Don't be too sure. And when you go casually and cautiously walking and climbing at the Rocks, watch out for any gigantic descendants of the snake that might be slithering nearby.
Behold, what is that shadowy vapor flickering in Concord Lighthouse Tower? What eerie glow at this midnight hour? Is it real? Is it a phantom? Should we cower? Could it be the ghost of John O'Neill, the first keeper of long ago? Has he returned to guard the ships fast or slow from the perils of the Susquehanna's flow? As in days of old, on nights so bleak, he guided the captains safely through the Chesapeake. Sometimes, you know, you can sense the glow of John O'Neill, that restless soul, the first lighthouse keeper of long ago.
In 1930, Sheriff Dewey Bowman received a call about 11 o'clock one night from an African-American caretaker stating that the supposedly unoccupied Walsh Mansion at Hartford Furnace was lit up on the second and fourth floors. The sheriff and Deputy Reese Bowman rushed to the property and upon arrival found quite a large group of men had gathered. A search of the house disclosed no intruders, and as all doors were locked, it still remains a mystery as to who turned on the lights. Maybe ghosts were holding a Halloween rendezvous in the big house. Well, the party's over now. But the last ghost out forgot to turn off the lights.
In 1870, this story, written by CBC of Abingdon, Virginia, in March 1869, appeared in Recollections of Olden Times in the Aegis and Intelligencer. Robert Holland was another good and useful man, and one of the best farmers in the county at that time, always accepting the Quakers and the stumps on Deer Creek. He married and bought and settled on one of the poorest and stoniest pieces of land in Harford County, between Bel Air and the Hickory. He at once went to work and piled up the stones, cleared out the thickets, planted fruit trees, plowed deep, put all the land he could spare in grass, and raised the biggest crops of rutabagas a year or two after he took possession that I ever saw, either before or since. His land was bounded by Bynum's Run, I think, in the direction of town, and on his side of the run, a few steps below where the road crosses, had been a mill in the earlier settlement of the country. Scott Preston used to say that he was the only individual in the neighborhood who had not seen a ghost about that old mill. I would not have passed it after dark for Robert Holland's plantation. Not that my heart was not courageous enough, but unfortunately, I had a cowardly pair of legs.
Jericho Bridge is a covered bridge that was built in 1865 across Little Gunpowder Falls, downstream from Jerusalem Mills. Several ghost stories have been associated with this quaint little bridge. One story is about a young girl who was riding with her father in the back of an old farm truck. She was afraid of the dark, so her father had left her a lantern in the back for a light so she wouldn't get frightened. Traveling on the road that the bridge was located on, her father made a sharp turn, knocking the lantern on its side. His daughter had fallen asleep, and as they went through the covered bridge, the hay in the truck was ablaze. He stopped to do what he could, but it was too late. The young girl burned to death. Another story is that of a middle-aged woman who shows up as a white, faded, ghostly image. She walks through the bridge on some nights carrying a basket of flowers. Some have said that they've seen her as if she was a living being, but if they approach her, she vanishes.
Ask someone about the third floor of Joseph L. Davis, Post 47, American Legion, and Harvard Grace, and you may get strange glances in response. Once the site of a brick ferry house built in 1760, which was burned by the British on May 6, 1813. The current building was constructed in 1835 by Abraham Jarrett Thomas and used as the family residence before being remodeled and opening as the Lafayette Hotel in the 1920s. It was during the time of the Lafayette Hotel that a woman named Mary worked on the third floor of the building as Lady of the Night, providing company to men staying at the hotel. As the story goes, Mary became pregnant, tragically lost her baby, and slipped into depression. She eventually ended up taking her own life. Some say by hanging herself from the third floor banister. Since that time, the building, which was purchased in 1947 by the American Legion, has been home to Mary, a friendly and somewhat handsy spirit known to frequent the third floor. In fact, for a period of time, the third floor was barely used and largely avoided, primarily because it was used for storage. But some folks say they never felt comfortable up there and actively avoided it. The stories say that Mary liked to touch people, especially men, turn lights on and off at night, and make loud and strange noises as she shuffled around the third floor. And a bizarre twist, as the legend of Mary's ghost grew, so too did what appeared to be a human embryo or small baby that was seen emerging from the bark of a tree located beside the deck in the backyard of the American Legion. Was this the strange protuberance, the reemergence of Mary's long-departed baby, coming to finally reunite with its mother? Sadly, we'll never know. The tree, along with its strange growth, had to be cut down in 2017.
The death of William Morgan in 1909 brought some to recall a ghost story connected with the old Fernandez home place, the homestead in Bel Air. The story over the years has become so retold, so garbled, and so twisted that it may be well to give it more accurately. Someone reported only as X did not know the origin or foundation of the old legend or superstition, call it as you will, but can only repeat it now, as it was told to me years ago by my grandmother, Mrs. Fernandez. There was a guardian spirit or banshee, to give the old name, who was closely connected for weal or woe with the house and family. Before the death of any member of the family, or before the coming of any great sorrow or trouble there, would be seen wandering around the house a woman dressed in a close-fitting trailing robe of black, with a long white veil thrown over her head and hiding her face, wringing her hands, sobbing and wailing aloud. And the story went on. Should the property ever pass entirely away from the family and be sold, misfortune would come upon the home and it should be swept entirely away. The banshee to have the old place forever. It seems strange now how the prophecy appears to have been fulfilled, as far as the building itself is concerned, for within 2 years after the place was sold, both the big house and the cottage were destroyed by fire. The wooden structure was indeed lost to fire in 1904, and a large stone house was built on the spot. It is currently for sale, and one can only hope, for the sake of the potential buyer, that the banshee has moved on.
Back in 1933, there were stories of a ghost along Philadelphia Road. First reported near Baltimore and later in the vicinity of Aberdeen, it was said to have been seen between Northeast and Elkton, always proceeding in the northerly direction. Then the apparition digressed from its native haunts and was seen on the highway between Perryville and Port Deposit. Leighton E. Schmidt, who was returning to his home in Lancaster, PA from Baltimore via Havre de Grace, alleged to have seen the specter in one of the lonely hollows near Cokesbury in Cecil County. Like other accounts of the ghost's escapades, Mr. Schmidt reported that the early morning hours the headlights on his car picked up the figure of a shabby, stooped old man walking slowly ahead. The figure of this weird pedestrian remained before him in the highway for several hundred yards before it disappeared into space. Louis L. Earhart claimed to have been the first to encounter the ghost in the area near the top of Bacon Hill, between Northeast and Elkton. In any case, believe what you want, but think twice before picking up any hitchhikers late at night, anywhere.
There is an old underground vault in St. George's Episcopal Church Cemetery, also known as Spasuchia Cemetery, at Perryman. It contains the remains of Captain John Clark Monk, better known as the Swinging Sailor of Perryman. A song by that title was written by Captain Quint, a tropical rock band, in 2005. Back in 1827, Captain Monk was not buried in the traditional way. Before the old sea dog died, he made it clear that he did not want his body to touch the ground. So he was encased in a metal coffin of some kind, allegedly soaked in rum, and suspended from chains inside of the vault. On top of it stands a large sarcophagus that contains the remains of the sailor's daughter, Mary Minerva Monk Lewis. The chains no longer suspend his coffin, and it rests, unfortunately, on the ground of the brick-lined vault. It is said that sometimes, late on a moonlit night, you can hear the chains rattle. Maybe it's a signal for somebody to get him off the ground and suspend him once again. Believe it or not, mate,